Hi, I'm Mercedes Pfab here at the Captured on Canvas studio. Welcome to Picture This. For today's painting, picture this. We have a rainy day on a path. We have a romantic couple under a red umbrella, little rose patch, and the tree framing the right side of our canvas. So before we get started, we have to make sure we have everything ready in front of us. Most importantly, on our easel, I have my blank 16 by 20 standard canvas. Next, on our paint palette, we should have these following colors. We should have white, black, and red. For the paintbrushes, I'm going to be using 3. I have my large flat square tip brush, I have my middle-sized angular brush, and last but not least, my really tiny one for tiny, tiny detail. And don't forget to have a cup of water and paper towels for cleaning the brushes as you work. Anytime I start a painting, I always start with the background and paint the closest thing last. Let's start with those stormy clouds or haze up in the sky. Starting with my palette and my largest brush, I'm going to go ahead and prepare a medium to light gray, and then it's going to fade down into the white. I'm going to start with a big scoop of white, at least the size of a quarter, if not more. It's never fun to have to remix those colors. Then I'm going to take a little bit of black and mix that in. Always try to keep it in a nice little pile. Keep adding until you get your shade. So once you get your medium to light gray, I'm going to take it to the canvas. I'm going to start from the top with long brush strokes going left and right. And I'm going to take this down about a quarter of the way. And as you're working, you always have the sides of your canvas, so you can always continue that color around the top and the right and the left side. I always think it makes it look more complete when you do, especially if you're not going to frame it. Always remember too to put a nice even coat. You never want to glob that paint on, so then it takes forever to dry. So once you're down about a quarter of the way, I'm just going to wipe off some of that extra gray on my palette, dip right into my white, and I'm going to start blending this color into the white of the canvas. I always start with the white right underneath the gray, going all the way across first. Getting the sides. And then I'm going to take a little bit of paint, start overlapping that edge of the gray, back and forth. And the more you go back and forth, the more those colors are going to blend. Don't be afraid to carry it up into the gray, even adding a little bit of white up a little higher, giving it more of that cloud look. Going all the way across. And there we are. We have our sky complete. We can go ahead and clean off our brush. Anytime I clean my brush, I just take my cup of water, gently stir it in the bottom, and then wipe it on the sides and repeat until I get all that color worked out. The next part I'm going to work with is the next part of our background, which is the path. I'm kind of just doing a very abstract, so it just kind of flows into the white background we have. So I'm going to use that middle-sized angular brush. I'm going to start with black at the front of my path, and I'm going to get a little bit lighter as it goes back so that it fades away. So with the black, I'm just going to decide right where my path is going to be with a line going up on both sides. This brush, I like to use the thin side of the brush and always lead with that shorter side so that I get that nice thin line. So with a little black, sometimes I put my canvas up on that little edge so I can get to the bottom a little better. I'm going to start with a dot about 1 inch up on the left and about 1 inch up on the right. And sometimes I like to make dots so that it's like connect the dots. It's a lot easier instead of drawing it out and guessing and not being where you wanted it. So I'm going to imagine that my path is about a third the way up on my canvas, and it's going to be about the width of my hand. So trying to center, maybe a dot up here, and about equal distance from the right, make my next dot. So that now all I have to do is draw that nice thin line to that dot, or close, and up that right side as well. Sometimes the quicker you move, the smoother that line is. And don't forget about those sides, continue that around too. So with the path, I'm just going to have it like a stone path, and I'm going to make it very abstract. So I'm just going to take this brush, holding it horizontally, and just zigzagging back and forth to make each of those stones. The less you think about it, the more natural it's going to look. I'm going to start down here in the corner. Just start with a little zigzag. Keep it very rigid. No stone is perfect, and they're all different. So now I always like to think of it as like a puzzle piece as well. So I'm going to go right next to it, kind of interlock them, keeping a little bit of space between them. And maybe this one kind of zigzags down. And I tend to keep them wider than they are tall. With the perspective looking down, they tend to be a little bit wider. Fitting over here on the left side. And I'm going to continue that up about 2 inches all the way across. All right, so we're going to continue that same thing, but as we go up every couple inches or inch, we're going to lighten that color so that it tends to blend more back into that white background. So the next color, I can go back to that original gray I mixed from up here. Since I have some, I'm just going to darken it a little bit. So I don't want it to be too dramatic of a change here with my next layer of stone. So something close to that. And I'm going to continue that same thing, but now as it's getting further away, I'm going to make them just a little bit smaller. So our next layer, now I'm gonna have a lighter gray. So because we're getting a little bit lighter, it's always good to maybe freshen up your brush. We got a lot of that dark color in there. Once again, just gently stir it, wipe it on the sides, and repeat. And then wipe off that extra water. Now I want it to be kind of that medium to light gray, even maybe just a little bit lighter than we did up in our sky. So I'm just going to go ahead and start with a new color. Once again, good size pile of white off to the side here, and then just a little bit of black. Just a little bit at a time at least until you get the shade. So there, you can actually see a difference in the shade, so you just want it a little bit lighter. Now I'm going to do the same thing. Once again, just getting a little bit smaller again. And maybe this time we don't go about 2 inches. Maybe it's only about an inch, inch and a half tall, this row of this lighter gray. So we know it's getting farther away with perspective. It's getting smaller as it gets further away. Maybe they're more wide then too, versus being so much taller. All right, one more shade. We're gonna add a big old scoop of white, lightening that up. This is gonna be very, very light. So you see, I'm gonna use that shade. That was the previous shade. And I'm gonna finish it with a few more stones completing right up to the sides of my path. All right, maybe just one more right there. Then we'll go ahead and clean off our brush. And while that dries, we're just going to take a little break. Welcome back to Picture This. Let's continue with our next steps. We're going to continue with a lot of black here for a while. We're going to start with the cool tree that's actually going to be framing that whole right side of our canvas. Trees can be a little bit scary, but I believe we can do it. I'm going to be using that middle-sized angular brush again. You'll find out this is my favorite brush, seriously is. And we're just going to use that thin side of it with a little bit of black. And I'm, once again, just going to make a couple dots so I know right where I'm going. I'm going to start the tree kind of about halfway up on the path here and probably centered from the path to the edge of the canvas. So we can always just make a dot there. And I'm going to imagine that it's going to curve way up here so that it's maybe 2 to 3 inches down from the top. Could always make a mark there. So now all we have to do is connect them. So I'm just going to draw that line, and it doesn't need to be perfect yet. So obviously we're going to widen up our tree. And I'm going to continue to the end of a branch that kind of maybe waves off to the left side there. I'm just going to focus on the trunk for now, adding some width to it. So we know it's much wider at the base, and as the tree grows out, it gets narrower. So I'm going to bring it out maybe 1 inch to the left and to the right. And I'm going to follow that same line I did, but as I go up, getting closer and closer, until right up at the arch, it's meeting right with that same line. We're going to do the same thing on the right side. Going in closer, closer, until we feel that it can blend right into our first line there, and then color it all in black. Nice long brush strokes. All right, so now we can continue into our branches. I always like to start with the biggest branches and then work to the smallest ones to fill up our space. So with that black, I always like to think of the branches too as like a bunch of Ys. It's like a Y off of a Y. So I'm going to follow maybe one branch with this tree going out to the right. And add a little bit of width towards the base of that branch, and we can also continue it off the side again. It's easy to forget that side as you add all these little lines. I'm going to maybe just add wherever I feel like I need to fill up the space. So maybe one more up here, kind of curving up. One from this branch here, curving down. But we don't want to go too low because we want to make sure that we have plenty of space for our couple and our umbrella later. And another thing I like to do is just, instead of having just a straight tree down here, we can always add just like little roots. Just kind of flick that brush down, using more of the wide side of the brush. And there we are. So now we're going to continue onto maybe a little rose bush over here on the left side. I'm going to keep it very simple and abstract. We don't always have to go crazy with the detail. So with this brush, so once again, light pressure, I'm just going to make these little wiggly lines over here near that left side. And these are going to go maybe about halfway up on our canvas. And as I go back, I'm going to make them just a little bit shorter as they get further away. That's all it needs to be. Now we can just add a little bit of leaves. This brush actually basically does the work for us. I always like to practice one on my palette. If I just push with that angled part of my brush and lift, it already makes a leaf shape. So we don't even have to draw them. So I'm just going to add some that just kind of bounce back and forth on each side of these little stems here. If you feel like some just need to float somewhere to fill the space, that works too. All right, one more step with the black. We're gonna jump right into the silhouette. People are the most toughest thing to draw, but I have a pretty simple way that we can make this happen. Let's just break it down to very basic shapes. With the black, I'm just gonna draw one straight line for where I want each of the people. So I'm gonna be about halfway up on my canvas, just a little bit to the left. I'm gonna draw a straight line down for how tall I'm gonna have the girl to the left and the guy to the right. We're gonna space him out about an inch or two. Same length, just drawing that straight line down. So now at least we have the height. The woman's like two triangles. We can just draw a little angle here up at the top, about 1.5 inches wide, give or take. And I'm just gonna draw this triangle coming down so that it's about halfway down on that line we drew. So now I have her torso, and I'm going to mirror that for her skirt. So I'm actually going to overlap these triangles a little bit, bringing this out, coming over, and the front of her. And then for him, I'm going to do basically the same thing, but instead with rectangles. I'm going to draw that straight line across for him, about the same width, and this I'm just going to draw straight down, stop right at her hip, go over, and complete that rectangle. And then for his legs, they're also going to be a rectangle. They're just going to be a little less wide than the body, coming down and going straight across at the bottom. So now we have them. We're starting to see the figures anyways. With that, let's just take a break from drawing. I always like to just take a little bit at a time. Let's color it in. Nice long brush strokes again. We just want to color in both of those triangles. And both of those rectangles for him. All right, they're a little twiggy, so we can always now add a little bit more to the figure. So for her, we can add a little bit more width around the base, and I always like to make her skirt flow in the wind. Maybe it's a breezy storm. And we'll color it in. You can add his little arm that's going across. It's just going to be a little downward angle. Another little line to make his arm. We can add a little bit more of that skirt to the front of her too, so that they are closer together. Could always add just a little bit of shape to him as well. Add in that slight curve to the back. And you can add her chest a little bit. And for the rest, it's a little bit more difficult. Those feet and legs are never as easy as we want them to be. But this right here is basically her leg already. All we need to do is just add a little bit of thickness for her calf. And then I'm going to have one leg kicking up behind here. So I'm just going to draw a straight line right where I'm going to want that line. It's kind of coming from the middle of her skirt too. Add a little bit of thickness. And then for the feet, I'm just going to make this curve coming down because I'm going to have her little heels on. A little straight line down for the heel. And we'll try to do that twice. Just that little curve coming down. Add that little straight line for that heel of her shoe, and then just add a little bit of width to it. His feet are going to be a lot more easy. It's just a little fatter line going straight over. All right, so there we are. We at least got our people. So now we're going to take a little break from that black and we're going to let this dry. So make sure you clean off your brush and we'll take a little break. Welcome back to Picture This. For our next part, let's add a little bit of color. We are going to start with our red umbrella that's going to cover up our headless people. So we're going to start with my large brush, or you can choose any middle-sized brush, they all work. With that red, I'm going to start with one dot right where I want the middle of my umbrella, the top. It's going to be maybe about a couple inches up from my people and centered. We can just start with one little dot there. And I'm going to see a little bit of the top, so I want to see a little bit of that rounded arch across the top. So I'm going to go about an inch or so higher, and I'm going to make that nice curve going out to the left and to the right. I like to make my umbrella plenty big so that they're going to keep dry. I'm going to then continue this nice downward curve, connecting from one side to the next. But we know those umbrellas have those little points. So now at least I have this nice guideline. From here, I'm just going to arch down to a point every inch or so, all the way across, following that line that goes all the way across and right to the end. I always like to take a step back, look at it too, make sure it looks right and proportionate. Then we're just going to do those nice long brush strokes to color it in the best we can. There, nice big umbrella. I'm not going to use this brush for the next part, so I'm going to go ahead and clean off my brush. And I'm moving back to my angular brush. So I'm going to continue with the red though to add those little roses. The roses, once again, I'm going to make them just as abstract as the stems and the leaves. So with these, I just like to make like a little C and then a parenthesis on each side. Using the very little tip of my brush, I'm just going to make a little C, a parenthesis, and a parenthesis. That's all they need to be. But it's just enough that we know what they are trying to be. So now we have our red done. Let's go ahead and clean off our brush. Actually, I'm thinking that down here, it just looks a little black and white. We can always add a little bit of color in there as well. So we know it's rain reflects, so we can just add a little bit of maybe a red down there. I'm going to use my large red brush, and with this, I think it'd be good to water it down so that it just fills in the cracks and doesn't cover up all that hard work in our path. So I'm going to take a little bit of that red to the side, and I'm going to take my brush, just dip it right into my cup of water, and mix that into that little bit of red so that it's nice and watered down. It's going to be like a puddle. And once again, we don't want too much of this paint, so you can always wipe it onto your paper towel. Go back, just get a little bit. And I'm just going to dust the canvas with quick little flicks, pulling in towards the center. And look at that, you have a red reflection. I like to focus from the left side here and maybe a little bit on the right. Kind of add in a little vignette. Just very, very little paint. That's all we need to do. So then we're going to go ahead and clean off our brush. Let's continue with the reflection on our ground. I'm going to go back to my angular brush. With a little bit of white, I'm just going to add little lines to imply that the water is reflecting off the ground. So just very little white. I'm going to use my brush horizontally, so I'm making those nice thin lines going left and right, kind kind of just focus right in the middle of my path underneath the people. So just make little lines to add that little bit of reflection there. And since my umbrella is not quite dry yet, we can always work on the rain next. With a little bit of black, I'm going to start adding that rain. These are just going to be droplets just kind of coming down across our canvas. Some are going to be longer, some are going to be shorter. I'm going to use that thin side of my brush again. Very light pressure, just flick. And when I flick, I pull it across the canvas and away at the same time, so it just disappears into our background. So just kind of choosing a couple spots to add that little bit of rain. And now we're getting to our finishing touches. We're going to go back to the black and add that outline around our umbrella. So with a little bit of black and light pressure, I'm just going to simply go around my umbrella first. Following each of these little arches, and I notice that her back disappears. This is a good time to finish her back right up into the umbrella. And then we can continue outlining here. All the way across the top. Sometimes the quicker you go, the smoother the line. And then while we have the black, before we outline the middle of our umbrella, I just like to add a little bit of her hair. She's got long hair, so we're just going to do little flicks back behind her back there. And now we can add the lines of our umbrella. We're going to go back and make that dot right where the top of the umbrella was. So that was centered and about 1 inch down. Sometimes you can still see it a little bit. And then I'm going to draw these lines that are from the top of our umbrella down to these little points, every one of them. So we want to make sure we're continuing this arch to make sure that it's not going to look flat. So leading with the thin side of the brush, I'm going to have an upward arch to the left and down to that left point. If it helps to make things more symmetrical, I will go to the right and do the same thing, arching up to the right, down to that point. So now we have the detail, or the outline of our umbrella. We'll go ahead and clean off our brush before we have our final touch. So let's make sure we can add a little bit of rain on top of that umbrella where it's even splashing when it hits it. So with a little bit of white, I'm just going to make little splashes. It's kind of just like a little V. I just kind of flick my brush just in a couple spots as those raindrops are coming down. You could even have a little line coming from it. Just a few. We don't need to get too crazy. And we can always have a couple droplets coming down from those little points, especially maybe in front of the people. Since there's a lot of black there, it's nice to break up that color sometimes and define that umbrella again. Even some kind of dribbling across the top there. And there we are. We have our stormy romantic path here. Before you're done though, make sure you clean your brush, and an artist always signs their work. I always use that smallest paintbrush, very light pressure, down in the lower corner. And sometimes I have to dip a couple times. I have a long name. And I like to put the date that I did it as well. And there you are. We have a masterpiece. Well, thank you for joining me, Mercedes Pfab, at the Captured on Canvas studio. We'll see you next time with Picture This.